Today, I'm going to be reviewing another premium prime lens made by Sigma. I feel like I keep saying that this year. They've been on an absolute roll when it comes to lenses. This is the brand new Sigma 135mm F1.4 DG Art Lens. Now, this lens was announced in September of 2025, released alongside the 35mm F1.2 Mark II. In fact, I've already reviewed that lens. So if you're interested, I'll place a link in the description. Now, by all means, this is not the very first 135mm F1.4 ever made, but it is the very first lens with autofocus built in, which is really impressive, especially when compared to the competitor lenses from the major brands like Canon, Nikon, and Sony. All of those 135mm prime lenses have an f1.8 aperture, making this lens 2/3 of a stop brighter when it comes to its low light performance. And you might think that because of that, this lens is going to be really expensive. And although it is an expensive lens, it could be a lot worse. Coming in at just over £1,600, it is a lot of money. But when we compare it to the other competitor lenses from the major brands like Canon, Nikon, and Sony, it's actually one of the cheapest, Sony being the only cheaper lens on the list, with Canon and Nikon lens being well over £2,000. And the Nikon lens, well, that's just over £1,000 more expensive than this Sigma lens. And don't forget, they are f1.8 lenses. So is there a reason why no one has made an f1.4 lens before, and is it actually worth a spot in your camera bag? Well, I guess there's only one way to find that out. And I'm gonna start right now. So this lens is made of a predominantly metal and plastic design with a metal lens mount. And as it's part of Sigma's Art series of lenses, that's their more premium lenses, it does have a weather-resistant design, designed to repel light, moisture, and dust, as you can see with the weather sealing gasket at the rear of the lens. Now, because this is a modern mirrorless lens, it does come in a variety of camera mounts. It comes in Sigma, Leica, and Panasonic L mount, as well as Sony E mount, which is the version I've got today. And I'm gonna be using it on my full frame Sony a7R4. But of course, it will also work on APS-C cameras as well. But don't forget, there will be a 1.5 times crop, turning this 135mm into roughly 200mm, making this lens really useful for indoor and outdoor sports photography, as well as close-up wildlife photography. Now, on the side of the lens, you've got an autofocus to manual focus switch, as well as a focus hold button. This lens also comes with an aperture ring, which is kind of to be expected for a Sigma lens in 2025. It is clickable from f1.4 to f16, although you can turn those clicks off with this little switch, making it nice and smooth to use, which is great if you are a video shooter. You can also lock it in A mode, where if you don't want to use the aperture ring at all, you can actually change the aperture on the back of your camera. Now, this does come with a focus ring, although it is really small for the overall size of the lens, and it is electronically coupled to the focus motor, which means it only works in manual focus. Now, it is nice to use, but in my opinion, it is just a little bit small. Now, due to the unique aperture of this lens, it being f1.4 versus f1.8, it is a very big and very heavy lens with quite a complicated optical formula, coming in with 17 elements in 13 groups, making this lens very heavy, coming in at a whopping 1.42 kilograms or 3.31 pounds. By far the heaviest lens that I've got on my list. If we have a look at just a few other lenses, this one is by far the heaviest by a large margin. But don't forget, this is an f1.4 lens, but the other lenses are f1.8. So do factor that into your buying decision. It's also a pretty big lens, but it's big in a peculiar way. It's not big as in it takes up a lot of room, it's just an odd shape. Because it's not very tall but very wide, it takes up an odd amount of room up in your camera bag. Now, one way to fix this is you can actually remove the tripod collar, and it's easy to do so. You haven't got to use Allen keys to do it. And I do really like that Sigma have done this. It does save a little bit of room, but it is still a very peculiar size. And if we have a look at the size chart here, it's not very tall, but it is incredibly wide. And again, that's just down to the unique aperture of f1.4. The tripod collar is made of metal, and it has a built-in Arca Swiss plate, which means if you're someone like me and often leaves their tripod plate at home, Luckily, you'll still be able to attach it to your tripod because they've built it into the actual tripod collar. And again, because of the very large aperture of f1.4, it has a giant filter thread coming in at 105mm, which is one of the largest filters that I have genuinely ever seen. It's like a giant dinner plate. And because of that, filters are going to be very expensive and, to be honest with you, difficult to find. Not many retailers actually stock 105mm, so good luck trying to find one for a reasonable price. And because this is a modern Sigma lens, it comes with all the accessories you'd expect. They're not missing out ones that you're gonna have to buy afterwards. You've got a front and rear lens cap, a really premium lens pouch, and of course it also comes with a lens hood inside the box. So overall, the build quality is exactly what you'd expect from Sigma in 2025. Incredibly well made, real premium design, but the downside to that build quality is it does make this lens really big and really heavy. Now, a 135mm focal length is a really nice focal length for a wide variety of different types of photography. I know a lot of portrait photographers love it, wedding photographers love it, and even canine photographers. It's got a real nice compression that not many other lenses offer you. And if you're doing headshots, for example, 135mm is arguably one of the best focal lengths for it. But what makes this lens special versus the other lenses is going to be that aperture. Because an f1.4 is bright and having it on a focal length like this with that compression, you're going to get amazing foreground and background separation. In fact, the depth of field of this lens at this focal length is so shallow, you can actually have focusing on the eyes and the nose be out of focus on your portrait photos. It is that shallow, meaning you're going to have amazing foreground and background separation, better than basically any other lens on the market. And that bokeh is going to be beautiful. It is so smooth, sometimes it's even difficult to work out what the background even was, which is really impressive. But of course, you've also got the low light benefit of this lens as well. If you were shooting in low light, maybe you're a wedding photographer, for example, this is going to be far better than basically any other lens, especially a zoom lens. Now, annoyingly, I didn't have this lens at the same time I had a wedding. As it is November, I don't usually photograph weddings this time of year. So instead, I tried this lens in a bunch of different environments that I can imagine 135mm doing really well in. I tried a little bit of sports photography, canine photography, portrait photography, and landscape photography. And actually, this lens did not disappoint with the image quality. I was really happy with a lot of the photos. But are there any disadvantages to this aperture? No other lens company makes an f1.4 lens. So let's have a look at a few graph images. Now, I'll be testing this lens on this. This is my Sony a7R4, which has a very demanding 61 megapixel full frame sensor. So if that lens performs well on this camera, it should perform well on yours. Okay, let's have a look at sharpness first with corrections turned on. If we go ahead and zoom into the center, we're getting really good center sharpness wide open at f1.4, which is to be expected. So let's have a look at the corners. And actually, they hold up really well. They're really sharp, although there's a little bit of chromatic aberration I can see in the very far corners, although it is very subtle. So a very good performance wide open at f1.4. And then it gets even better when we step down to f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, all the way to f8, where this lens is truly sharp in the center and especially the corners. Although it does start to soften around f11, and then at its narrowest aperture f16, it is just a little bit softer versus f8. That is just due to diffraction, which is definitely more noticeable on higher resolution cameras. Now, when it comes to flaring, I wasn't expecting it to be a very good performing lens due to the complexity of the optical design and the size of the elements, which is where this lens surprised me. I actually think the flaring was about average for a telephoto prime lens. There isn't much in the way of flaring elements and they're not very strong, although contrast doesn't hold up very well when you do point it towards bright lights. So I would recommend using a lens hood if you are using it in a very bright and challenging lighting environment. And if we go ahead and turn corrections off and have a look at distortion and vignetting, it's pretty good. Now, there's a mild amount of pincushion distortion, although some portrait and wedding photographers might actually prefer that, and there's a small amount of graduated vignetting in the corners. Although we can pretty much push that right to the corners at f2, and it pretty much disappears entirely at f2.8. So overall, a pretty average score for distortion and vignetting. And with a minimum focus distance of just 110 centimeters, meaning it's got a maximum reproduction ratio of 0.14, I would say this is below average for an 135mm prime lens. The other competitor lenses that we've actually looked at in today's video from Sony, Sigma and Canon all have a closer minimum focus distance and a larger maximum reproduction ratio. And close-up image quality wide open at f1.4 is quite poor, with a lot of ghosting and quite a lot of chromatic aberration. Although we can dramatically improve it if we step down to f2, f2.8, f4, and then it's razor sharp at f5.6. So the only Achilles heel of this lens when it comes to its overall optical performance is the close-up image quality. Now, if you'd like to have a closer look at any of the sample images that I've taken in today's review, make sure to go ahead to the link in the description. You can download them yourself and pixel peep as much as you want. Now, like I was saying at the start of this review, what makes this lens unique versus other lenses on the market with the same aperture is this lens comes with autofocus. And what's great about the autofocus of this lens is it's incredibly quick and really precise, especially for a lens with an f1.4 aperture. And that's just thanks to Sigma putting their new HLA motor in this lens, which stands for High Response Linear Actuator. Now, the problem you've got with wide aperture prime lenses like this versus a zoom is the elements are significantly larger because they let in more light. So this new HLA motor has been specifically designed to move larger elements. The other problem you've got is the depth of field is so shallow that even small movements of your subject or the camera could mean your photo is completely out of focus. So I really tried it in a variety of different environments and quite complex lighting environments. And I must say the autofocus really did perform very well. Now, is it as fast as other lenses that I've used? I wouldn't say so. I'd say a 70-200mm probably has more reliable autofocus. But don't forget, they usually have an aperture of f2.8, where this has got an aperture over 1.5 stops brighter at f1.4. So that really shows you how much this autofocus motor is actually performing if it's almost as good as a 70-200mm. So I would say it's good for slow to medium moving subjects, but as soon as you start shooting at f1.4 and the subject's running right towards you, you might notice that it might not be as sharp as you'd expect. But again, that's just due to the larger elements and incredible shallow depth of field at f1.4. Another thing to think about is this lens is missing image stabilization, which could be a factor that many videographers might not want to use it. As well as if you do own a camera like me with IBIS, which stands for in-body image stabilization, the IBIS isn't really designed to counteract movements at this focal length. So you'll find that if you are doing handheld photography, it's not very smooth. For example, here is IBIS turned off and IBIS turned on, and there isn't much of a difference. So to be honest with you, I wouldn't really use this lens for handheld video. I'd probably just stick it on a tripod. So overall, what do I think of this lens and do I recommend it after using it for around a month in a whole bunch of different photography environments? Well, let's break this lens down. Optically, I think this lens is almost perfect, and the photos that you're going to get from this lens are genuinely one of a kind. And the photos that I've taken are definitely going to be in my portfolio for a very long time. I think if you're a dedicated canine photographer, portrait photographer, or wedding photographer, optically, this lens is perfect. And I love this lens when it comes to its foreground and background separation. And that Bokeh, yeah, this has now become, I think, the new Bokeh king out of any lens on the market, taken away from the other Sigma 105mm f1.4 that I reviewed earlier last year. But that doesn't make this lens perfect. And there are a few negatives that you might want to take into consideration before you part with your hard-earned cash. Firstly, is going to be the size of this lens. It's a very weird size, which means it's going to take up an unusual amount of room in your camera bag, and that's just not ideal. It's very wide, but not very tall, which means it's roughly the same weight as a 70-200mm, but around about 30% wider, so it's a bit of an odd lens. As well as that weight aspect, it's a very heavy lens. So if you're carrying it around all day, maybe you're a wedding photographer, that's gonna hurt your back after 10, 12 hours of shooting. So you definitely wanna think about that. Now you can reduce the weight a little bit by removing the tripod collar, but again, you've still got to carry it around in your camera bag if you want to bring it on a photo shoot. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. And the price, it is quite an expensive lens and roughly the same price as Sigma's 70 to 200mm f2.8, which is very versatile, but of course, not the same aperture. So of course, write down in the comments below, what would you buy? Would you buy a more premium zoom lens or would you buy this dedicated prime lens? For me, I'm probably going to stick with my 85 f1.4. It's a lot lighter and offers very similar image quality, but of course, not that amazing depth of field. So I'd be really interested in the comments, what would you go for? Is this lens just too cumbersome and just too big to carry around? Or are you someone that's just after absolute perfect image quality? Write it down in the comments below. And with an overall score of 39 out of 50, this is a recommended lens to have in your camera bag. I also want to say thank you to Sigma for loaning me this for the review. But of course, as always, it's a totally independent review and Sigma don't get to watch it before it goes live. Thank you to all of my YouTube members that are currently supporting the channel. If you guys want to support the channel and get some awesome perks, including free Lightroom presets and get to watch videos like this before they go live, make sure to go ahead to the link in the description. I've been James for Photo Fever, and I'll catch you guys next review.